I'm Ramzi Kassem. I'm a professor of law at the City University of New York School of Law. I co-direct the CLEAR project here at CUNY Law School. It's a clinic and a nonprofit. We work with communities, clients, and movements that are targeted by the U.S. security state. And we're presently representing Mahmoud Khalil, Yunseo Chung, Rümeysa Öztürk, Mohsen Mahdawi, and others who are either presently detained by ICE or who are student activists at risk of detention by ICE.
Thank you. Can you give us a short summary of who these students are and what do they like to do in their free time?
Yeah, Mahmoud Khalil, of course, is a graduate student at Columbia University. He was active in the movement in defense of Palestinian lives and rights. He was a negotiator, a mediator between student protesters at Columbia and the administration. He was one of two lead negotiators who played a very constructive role in that capacity. He's very much a diplomat. He's also now a father. His wife, Dr. Noor Abdullah, gave birth to their first child yesterday, on Monday, April 21st. And unfortunately, he was not there for that, even though we were all hoping that we'd be able to get him out of the ICE detention facility in Louisiana to be there. So it's a bittersweet moment for him, having missed the birth of his child because he was detained by ICE for no other reason than his speech in defense of Palestinian human rights offended people in power here in the United States. Rümeysa Öztürk is a graduate student at Tufts. She was also taken by ICE from the streets of her campus, her university. She's a doctoral student focusing on child development. Her love of children is what drew her to this field. And absurdly, the government is claiming that she has to be detained simply because she co-authored an op-ed where she urged Tufts University to respect and honor student Senate resolutions in defense of Palestinian basic human rights. Yunseo Chung is a third year. She's a junior undergraduate at Columbia. She was valedictorian of her high school. She was very excited to be a student at Columbia. She participated in a protest against the university's crackdown, Columbia University's disciplinary crackdown on its own students, as part of its own effort to silence student protest and speech in defense of Palestinian rights. Because of that, she was also targeted by ICE. ICE sought to detain her. We were able at CLEAR with our co-counsel and friends working with us on the case, we're able to get a court order from a federal court here in New York prohibiting ICE from detaining her. So she thankfully remains free, but she's still at risk. And so we're continuing to fight in court for her. All of these individuals are international students. Mahmoud Khalil is a U.S. permanent resident, but he's Palestinian. He was born in Syria. He has Algerian citizenship, but he's Palestinian ethnically and a U.S. permanent resident. Yunseo Chung is from South Korea. She was born there, but she came to the United States at the age of 7. She's also a U.S. permanent resident, and obviously her entire life is here. Her friends, her family, everything, her future is here in the United States. This is the country she calls home as well. Rümeysa Öztürk is a Turkish citizen, and she was here on a student visa. And Mohsen Mahdawi is also a Palestinian Columbia student. He was finishing his undergraduate degree. He's also a permanent resident, and he was taken by ICE in Vermont after U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services summoned him for a naturalization interview. He's been a green card holder, a permanent resident for over a decade, and he had applied for citizenship, and so they called him in for his interview, and ICE ambushed him there, which he expected. He anticipated that this was a possibility. He's now in detention in Vermont. His legal team was able to obtain a temporary restraining order in time to prevent ICE from moving him across state lines, the way they did with Mahmoud and the way they did with Rümeysa, taking Mahmoud from New York to Louisiana and taking Rümeysa from Massachusetts to Louisiana to be incarcerated in ICE facilities there.
And I know you gave us quite a bit of detail about where they are now. Are there any other details that you want to share with our supporters or our base about what has happened to them since they've been abducted to this point now?
Yeah, so across cases, the government is very transparently and very explicitly um, trying to silence speech, dissent, and it happens to be pro-Palestinian speech and dissent. Speech and activism of different sorts, of different degrees, whether it's protests or negotiations between protesters and university administrations, or op-eds, or other forms of expression. This is very explicitly an attack on free speech rights. It happens to be free speech that is exercised in defense of Palestinian lives and rights, which of course should be celebrated and should be commended and not punished. But there is a larger threat looming here, to the extent that this government, this administration, is able to weaponize the immigration system to undercut First Amendment rights and to punish people for exercising those First Amendment rights. Well, that's a model, that's a template that this administration and future administrations will be able to use against any issue set that the Trump administration today disagrees with. So it dislikes the fact that folks are speaking up, students are speaking up in defense of Palestinian rights and in ways that are critical of U.S. and Israeli policy. Well, we're going to detain these students, and the next time around, the same template will be applied to maybe student non-citizens who are active in defense of racial justice, the rights of minorities, LGBTQ rights, reproductive rights, abortion, what have you, any set of issues that this administration happens to disagree with. The blueprint that we're seeing in these cases could be applied to try to silence those people. And it'll start with the non-citizens, it'll start with the visa holders and undocumented folks, and even permanent residents of the United States. But that same logic could be applied to US citizens eventually, because what's happening is it's weakening First Amendment rights, it's weakening free speech rights. That's what they're trying to do. And those are rights that everybody in the United States has. They're not limited to US citizens. Those are rights that every person in the United States has. There's no difference between a citizen and a non-citizen in this regard. The Supreme Court has been very clear that green card holders have the same expressive rights. And for the most part, that is true legally. And so that's all the more reason why these cases are important. What's happening to Mahmoud and to Rümeysa and to Yunseo, it's not just happening to them. We have to draw a line so that not only it stops happening to them and we're able to bring them back home and free them from the risk of arbitrary ICE detention, but we're also in this fight for ourselves and for everybody who feels like they should be able to speak their mind, even if people in power disagree.
Absolutely. And as you've drawn, as you've told us, these have major implications to also just everyday people, as you've mentioned. And in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia's case, do you feel, what are some similarities or some differences that you see with your cases and his case?
Well, in Kilmar's case, the it, what is equally obvious is that it is an extreme, radical assertion of executive power by the Trump administration. They are trying to push the envelope as far as it will go to see what they can get away with, whether it's in cases like Mahmoud Khalil's or cases like Mr. Abrego Garcia's, where he himself also had legal protection in this country. Mr. Khalil was a U.S. lawful, or is a U.S. lawful permanent resident, someone who has a right to be here and to live here and to work here. Mr. Abrego Garcia had withholding of removal. He had a form of immigration legal relief that should have prevented the government from removing him. And what the government did instead, what the Trump administration did, was it tried an experimental legal theory and then quickly whisked him out of the country and took him back to El Salvador, a country where he is at significant risk. And it did that knowingly, it did that intentionally. And so what we are seeing here are radical assertions of executive power. They're a form of flirtation with authoritarianism, even if we haven't yet arrived, perhaps, at a stage of outright authoritarianism. It is definitely leaning in that direction. It's a form of flirtation with that very different, undemocratic mode of government, and it has to be seen and named for what it is. What happened to Kilmar is an outrage, and our hope is that he'll be reunited with his family here in the United States as soon as possible. Even the Supreme Court, dominated by Trump appointees at this point, and their ideological allies, even the Supreme Court ordered the Trump administration to at least facilitate his return home. And so we hope to see that happen, even though it seems like the administration is intent on its radical assertion of executive power, and trying to see just how much it can get away with. This is all fundamentally political. What happens outside of court is even more important than what happens inside federal courthouses. Of course, those of us who are lawyers are going to use those tools as well, but the amount of pushback that the administration sees on the streets, in the media, in public discourse, that is hopefully what's going to shape the direction that we go in coming years.
Absolutely. And I think that's a perfect segue. I did want to ask, what do these next steps look like for these students? And like, how can people, regular people, support this? You mentioned a little bit about people being on the streets. Are there anything else that regular people can support you all as these next steps come down?
Yeah, I mean, all of us have a role to play, and I don't presume to know exactly, what that role might be, and I don't think it's a cookie cutter answer. I mean, you're asking the most important question, which is, how can we contribute to, putting up a fight to what this administration, this government is trying to do? How can we push back? I think we can all do that in different ways. For us, of course, like the efforts on behalf of Mahmoud Khalil, Yunseo Chung, Rümeysa Öztürk, Mohsen Mahdawi. These efforts are going on in court. There are ways to, every time. I mean, when I walked out of the first court hearing in Mr. Khalil's case in New York in federal court, I argued on behalf of our team and on his behalf, there were over 1,000 people outside that were masked. That is really important. Like having people rallying around these court dates to express their viewpoints in solidarity, not just with the individual, not just with Mahmoud Khalil or Yunseo Chung, but also with the Palestinian people, to show that it is an American movement. It's not going to be silenced. It's not going to be cowed by what the administration is trying to do. And in fact, it's going to backfire. These efforts at silencing and dispersing the movement are actually going to motivate people and mobilize people. So I think people coming out around the court dates, whether it's the immigration courts or federal court, whether it's Mahmoud's case or Rumeysa's case or Yunsa's case or Mohsen's case or any of the other cases, those are good focal points for organizing. There are efforts to make sure that these courtrooms are full of observers, just to indicate that the community, that the public cares about these people, and that we haven't forgotten collectively, and that we'll be there. Those are really important messages to both the courts and the government, frankly. But there are ways beyond that as well. People can mobilize and protest in ways that are completely disconnected from the legal process, and that's fine, and that's important as well. People can call. You can participate in the sort of electoral side of politics as well. I mean, all of it is political work, but on the electoral side, engaging with elected officials, whether it's congressional representatives or senators or people in the executive branch, just to express your distaste for what's happening here and what's being done in the name of security, or what's being done in the name of combating anti-Semitism. I mean, this is all being couched, pretty absurdly, by people who are avowed, documented racists and anti-Semites, and all of a sudden they're the ones who are saying that they care about combating racism and anti-Semitism. Of course, there's nothing about that should be believable. But that's really the approach that they're taking. They're weaponizing this so-called combat against anti-Semitism to silence people who, far from being any sort of anti-Semites, are folks who are advocating for the equality and dignity of the Palestinian people. Mahmoud Khalil, for example, has always said very clearly, including in press interviews, that he believes that the freedom and liberation and dignity of Jewish people and Palestinians are intertwined in historical Palestine and what's now Israel Palestine. and that the freedom and dignity of Israelis and Palestinians go together, and that their liberation goes together. And so I think it's really important to find a way to push back, however you can, whether it's through the electoral political system, through protests, through writing letters and op-eds, through donations to organizations that are doing this work. It doesn't matter. I'm sure there's a way that you can find to do that, but it's really important to do that, to remain engaged.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We have 3 minutes left. Anything else you want to add for our supporters, our base that are listening, that want guidance, that want to support? Anything about the students in specific?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, just having spoken with all of them in the last 24 hours, that, Mahmoud Khalil from behind bars in Louisiana, Rümeysa Öztürk from behind bars in Louisiana, Yunseo Chung, who remains free, thankfully, all of them are deeply and immensely grateful for um, every bit of support, every bit of solidarity that, folks who are watching this have shown towards them in different ways. People have shown up for protests. People have spoken out. They've written articles. They've written letters. So they and their families are immensely grateful, and they really look forward to being able to thank you in person soon, as soon as we're able to beat back uh, this really remarkable and shocking and outrageous form of overreach by the Trump administration.